want to network with, immediately network with the team, just because of just to have that in place, have the psychologist sit in on an IEP meeting, even if there's no, needs that are apparent, just to make sure, because I know that, with Jack in particular, there were times when he was okay, and then there were times when he wasn't, and it was helpful to have the psychologist there so we could be like, okay, what can we do about this? And sometimes he's gotten some support at school, but he got involved in a social skills group, which was the suggestion of the school psychologist, and it was with other kids that had some level of disability. So, I think that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really important. I think that, those are great suggestions. Yeah, especially with the nature of TSC. And don't take it for granted that your school psych knows what that is.
Right.
Because
good point.
That is necessarily not a given. Me being my experience, I know what it is because I have siblings who have TSC, but, that doesn't necessarily mean that we know all the functional implications, how it manifests. And so,
and it's different. It's not like there can be, there's just such a range, and there's such a range, I think, in any diagnosis
a school psychologist is not a general practitioner, and we can't, be experts in everything. And so it's always good to bring, ask them if they know what TSC is, and, they could always, a big part of school psychology is remaining a learner. And so when you're presented with a kid like that has could have such a diverse range of issues that TSC kind of implicates, you definitely want to make sure that we're all on the same page there too.
That's excellent advice. So educating the team, it's not assumed that they're going to know the range of things that might come up. So, and that kind of led me to something else. I guess, what is the most frustrating aspect of your, in your role as a school psychologist, and what is, I guess just talk about that a little bit. What do you see as the most difficult part of?
I think most of the time, for me, it's the most difficult when a parent comes in with an advocate without having met me. I think
beautiful.
Assuming that the relationship is going to go south is not the way to go when it comes to making friends with your school psych. Because we most of us got into the field because we wanted to help kiddos, and so it doesn't always feel good. That's one of the hardest things is coming in with an advocate, and sometimes it's frustrating to see, especially with advocates, how they monopolize a parent's time to get paid, because sometimes they'll make a meeting last so much longer, like an hour and a half longer than it could have. Because they want to get paid extra, and they're not really an expertise. Consider also their level of expertise. If you are considering, hiring an advocate, that may be great, but they may not actually know what they're talking about. I've had most of my better interactions have actually been with lawyers who actually know their stuff.
Interesting.
Believe it or not. Yeah. Believe it or not. They're usually pretty friendly and forward about the process, but an advocate may just delay the process. And honestly, the most frustrating times are when an advocate is involved and they're arguing about an IEP, which is great, but then that lengthens the time that the student isn't getting services that they could have. And so that's something that's always on the forefront of our mind is, we're costing the student services potentially by delaying this process. And so that's another thing to consider, I think, when you're dealing with a school psychologist is, and the thing that I would recommend is saying to your school psych is actually not, trying to sit down and say, what do you want your student to be able to do? Because sometimes, parents will come in with they're not reading, they're not, but especially when they get older, like Jack, you want to be able to articulate what you want them to be able to do in their later life, and life skills is going to be an important aspect for most kids with TSC. And so
absolutely,
you want to be able to identify those areas of what do you want them to be able to do And usually your school psych or special education coordinator will be really receptive of getting you to those goals, especially, you know, functional impacts for independence. So that was a long answer to a very short question.
That was really good. And, you know, every time while you're talking, I think of like 1,000 more questions kind of along that line. And then 2 seconds later, I lose my train of thought. But, I
know where I got it from.
Oh my goodness. Anyways, I think that's a really good, you know, I think a lot of parents they're almost on the defensive when they come into these situations, because particularly I felt a lot of shame and not, you know, and I don't know if it, you know, it was the school district putting that off. A shame and blame was, people are like, oh, you're going to go to this IEP meeting, it's going to be all shame and blame. And I guess I always tried to think, you know, okay, well, these people I'm going to be working with for the rest of the time that my kid's in high school, I've got to find a way to, like, they're human beings, you know, we're not all out to get each other. How can we all be on the same page? You know, and as far as as advocates, I think I've used an advocate before. She was really willing to work with, you know, she knew I didn't have much money. So it ended up being a really positive experience. And she knew so many people in the district that we just basically had to have her walk into the room. And then they were much more receptive to, you know, working through what we were working through. Yeah, and
that's huge. That relationship, like, it can be, you know, if they have a good relationship with the school, you can tell immediately when they walk into a meeting, you know.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference. And I can see how that would definitely be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be my suggestion, to hire an advocate that you feel like is going to be able to work with and not, you know, there are some times when, you know, it does get tense, and that's just the way it is. I'm sure you know all about that. But keeping the bigger picture in mind as far as human beings being involved and being able to talk through it. But
and a good thing to remember is that, you know, I think sometimes we forget that the school serves everyone. And so, you know, there are, you know, 1,000 other kids potentially in the school. So we have such a short staffing on our end that sometimes, you know, our services are almost never going to meet all of the students' needs. And despite our wish to do much better than we can, it's not pragmatic and it's not realistic to expect a school to meet every single need.
Good point.
Those are going to be needs outside of the school that you're going to have to find a way to meet if you want improvement sometimes. So
that's helpful,
I think that's
because
good to remember.
There are times when you do need a referral, and I think having a school psychologist that can help you connect with, you know, other services providers or resources.
Yeah, the social workers are awesome about that too, where I am here.
Oh, really?
They're wonderful about connecting parents, and they're so well connected in the community around us. So
do you have social workers in your school system?
Yes, actually we're trying to get there's one social worker per high school and one social worker per middle school this year. And
so they kind of act as a resource hub as well as
yes, exactly. They're the big resource hub for connecting parents, especially parents with not a lot of money. We know that there are community resources also that can help with you know, some of the vast expanse of needs that can come with us having a student who's disabled.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear. I don't know if our district has that. I'm not going to say we do or don't, but I don't remember that. And that would be very helpful for school districts. I guess one thing I did want to touch on is your thoughts on, you know, I know a lot of parents that have kids with tuberous sclerosis. You get that big overriding label of tuberous sclerosis complex, and then all of a sudden you're getting these other labels, like for instance, you know, Asperger's syndrome or autism spectrum. And it's hard at first because, you know, I was like, well, I already have this. There's already this label. Why do I need to throw all these other labels on my kid? But then I realized that if I had some of these other labels, I was going to get better services. So, I mean, I know you and I have had personal discussions about labeling and the whole field. And, you know, I guess you told me, I mean, and you can talk about this, you know, seeing it more from a needs perspective as opposed to labeling each kid with like, what's your thought on when to use the labels and when to move away from those and focus more on a needs perspective?
Yeah, I think as a school psychologist, it's a nature of the beast, to have to label kids, because in order to label kids, you have to get services. And so it's kind of the gatekeeper that we all have to travel through. And so if you can swallow the label, I'd say take it, because you may get better services, like you said.
Particularly autism. I think that's one that I didn't realize how much, how many more doors that would have opened for us.
Yeah, and if it's a functional label, really, in the school.
True.
Do you meet these criteria? Is performance impacted as a result of these criteria? We want to provide services to support what we're seeing. Unfortunately, we only have 13 disability labels under IDEA, and those are the way that we get student services. And so some school districts are great, like we were talking about Iowa, and how students are every single student with a disability is just labeled student with a disability in order to get services, which is wonderful. But also some school districts are very driven by those diagnoses or labels, whatever you call them. And so they'll only provide services related to that.
I've heard that side of the coin too. Yep.
Yeah. And so if they're seeing functional impact, I would, take the label in order to get better services.
Okay.
Because it's really about providing services that the student needs. Unless you believe, not all. There's a number of good school districts out there, but there's also something to consider, that not every school district is positive, and consider whether they're trying to ask them what they would like to support, because that may be important in a school district that maybe not be great at supporting, and they may just trying to get your kid out of the gen ed classroom, which, I hate to say, but it's, I've experienced it in Tennessee. I won't say the school district, of course, but there is
that can be very frustrating
because
there's only I know the funds are there's more to it than that, and it's not that they're intentionally trying to do that. They probably their hands are tied, and that's maybe, unfortunately,
the consideration with those tier 1, like Title I, schools, is that they don't have the resources anyways to help your student learn. And so always ask what kind of supports they're looking for. If they want to add on a label to something that you already have, ask if that includes a support that you're looking for.
Oh, that's great.
If it's gonna, if it's going to be, what kind of special education hours, what kind of support are they talking about?
So get it in writing, kind of get it.
And just to figure out
verbally spoken.
What in addition what they would like to provide. If they're not going to provide anything in addition, then why take the label?
Why take the label? Absolutely.
There's no reason for it. That is one of the frustrating things here, is that a lot of our labels don't drive services, and so we buy their needs-based services after you're found eligible under any disability category. And so a parent may want another label, but they're already getting the services that they need. So it's a waste of time to test the student for needed services. So,
that's helpful. And I think that it's not really along those lines, but I guess, as a parent of kids with a disability what can you do to support, not so much your child's differences, but, what can you do at home to support a child that's going to school? They have a disability. They know they have the disability, to encourage them to feel less different and less stigmatized,
Mm-hmm.
What would your suggestions be as far as support at home, or even reaching out to the school district? My kid he's really anxious about being in this class with this particular group, based on, he's feeling. Are you catching my drift at all, or am I just away?
I'm catching you. I think, especially as far as the stigma goes, I think it's good that students, of course, recognize that there is a problem, but also recognize that doesn't mean that they can't learn. And so emphasizing, it's